November. Just to remind everyone, we're live streaming on the council's YouTube channel. Can members in the room please make sure you use your microphones, particularly as we've got our cabinet member and officers online today. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Celeste for apologies and substitutions.
Thanks, Chair. We have got Councillor Muddyman standing in for Councillor Jarvis this evening, who sent apologies. We've also got Councillor Stairs, who sent apologies, who will be substituted by Councillor Yateman, who I believe is just running late this evening. And lastly, Councillor Kine may also be late in joining the committee this evening.
Thank you very much. We now move to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in regard to anything under consideration of the committee tonight? I thought there probably wouldn't be. So then we move to Chair's announcement. So I do have one very brief announcement, which is to say, those of you who have checked your emails in the last day might have seen that we've had to move the special scrutiny meeting where we will be considering the local government reorganisation. That's due to late publication of papers, basically to enable the committee to have as long as possible to look at those. So the meeting will now take place on the 5th of November. I believe it had previously been circulated as the 2nd or 3rd of November. Thank you. So yeah, now it will be on a Wednesday night. That should hopefully give everyone just a couple of days longer to look over the materials. We will also, once they come out, sort of stress the bits that it's really important to focus on because there's likely to be quite a lot of material given the size of the item. The other thing I'm going to announce is I have just got over a cold, so I apologise if I sound a bit nasally tonight. I'm struggling a little bit, but feeling better, so that's good. We'll now move to consider the minutes of the previous meeting. I'm going to presume everyone has had a chance to look at these in advance. This relates to the meeting on the 5th of August, so a month ago today. Note that there are confidential minutes in there, so I'm going to ask in 2 sections. Firstly, were there any questions or corrections on the standard public minutes? Seeing none. Was there then anything that anyone wanted to ask about the confidential minutes, bearing in mind that if you do want to ask, we'll have to go into closed session, so please don't ask outright. Again, seeing none. Are we happy to approve those as an accurate record? Thank you very much, everyone. We don't have any addresses from members of the public, nor do we have any councillor addresses, so we can move rapidly on to our first substantive item, which is the citizen and community engagement policy. We have online Councillor Chapman as the cabinet member, Tom Hook and Jar Jar as the 2 officers. So I'll pass over to you, Councillor Chapman.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me all right. Is that okay? Yeah, good. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for letting us join remotely. I do appreciate that. This item is all about citizen and community engagement and is a policy for that purpose. This is something we look at regularly and frankly on an annual basis to make sure we're getting it right. I'd like to thank Jar Jar for all her hard work on this. She's been frankly tremendous on this. And it's good also to have Tom as one of the deputy CEOs of the council with us too to answer questions. Basically, citizen and community engagement is about understanding people's needs, their views and their priorities. If you don't do that properly, you can't run a good council and provide the right services to them. I would also expect too that on occasion, the feedback we get does change what we do, actually, makes either substantial or small alterations, which are very important. And it's all part of the end of our accountability to our citizens and all those people who we serve. The paper is pretty clear. I would say that the interesting areas are an overview of the factors influencing citizen and community engagement, especially Oxford's diversity and recent housing sector reforms and the reforms that the government have already carried out, which put greater responsibilities upon us, and I will talk about that in a minute. The principles of this engagement policy around transparency, flexibility, proportionality, timeliness of feedback, giving feedback to people when they've given us feedback in the first place, inclusiveness and accessibility, and strengthening the tenant voice. And then a look at the different channels we use to do that. and the approaches we take, not all the same in every case, they're often customized. And then what we do with that information in terms of information sharing and engagement coordination within the council. Now, having a policy like this is not a statutory obligation, but it's, in my eyes, and I think in the eyes of all my colleagues, would be an absolute necessity to have this. And we've looked at some of the best practice, which includes key sources like the Cabinet Office work and the Local Government Association. The other thing that's changed since the last policy was that we've had the Social Housing Act, and that has some extra obligations upon councils, particularly those that have council housing in their portfolio, regarding tenant engagement and the protection of tenants' rights. So this policy sets forth how the council will fill those obligations through enhanced engagement and service improvements tailored to tenants' needs. Obviously, there was a consultation about this type of consultation, if you like, and we had responses from 197, almost 200 people between May and June. Broad support for the way we were going about it. People reported taking part in surveys through engagement through different things like surveys, online surveys, a residents panel, speaking with councillors. However, some concerns were raised about, I think, the timeliness of our response sometimes, about trust and communication. So the policy has strengthened the need for clear and timely feedback, and has offered a range of accessible ways for people to get involved, helping to build trust and show that residents' views are taken very seriously. The policy has also been updated, and this is a particular interest to Scrutiny, I think, to reflect the Cabinet's feedback on the citizen experience strategy, which you looked at earlier in the year, which included the need for more in-person consultation in outlying areas of the city, support for language interpretation where needed, and proactive engagement with children under 12 where appropriate. So those were things you specifically asked for, and we've now incorporated them in the policy. So I think I'll stop there. That's a pretty high-level overview, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I think I will leave the more technical questions to Jar Jar and Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chapman. I'm just going to check, did Jar Jar and Tom want to add anything at this point, or are you happy for us to proceed to questions?
Nothing from me, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Who would like to get us started with questions from the committee? Councillor Altaf Khan?
I believe Councillor Chapman said there are 200 responses from the city, which is, I believe, is 150,000 population, and we got 200 only people replied. And also, looking here on this report, it says youth and minority engagement. So now, previously we have been talking about minorities, now added youth into it, and say the example is a youth voice panel. So this is how we are only gathering feedback from the minority communities? That's my two questions.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Chapman, I'll just try and take one more and then I'll pass back to the group, if that's okay. Does anyone else wanted to raise one at this point? Councillor Miles?
Yeah, I understand we as a panel had provided feedback previously around engagement in different languages to ensure inclusivity. The question, though, I guess, is how then it would be decided the resource allocation for which languages, because also it becomes a challenge when we are such a diverse city and there are so many languages spoken. So how could that be managed in a way that it was, you know, resource effective, but also achieve the objective? So yeah, I just want to understand that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. Councillor Chapman, I'll pass back to you for a round of responses.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about the 200 response. I mean, there are quite a lot of consultations we put out which get less than that, to be honest. And so it's not an unreasonable figure. I'd always like more. But that's the figure we got. And what was, I think, clear, and Jar Jar may want to say a bit more about this, was the consistency of the replies, really. That the replies were pretty consistent about the things people cared about and what they wanted to see us do. And therefore, you know, you can have more replies, but they don't always tell you a lot more, because it's a bit like an opinion poll. Once you've got a reasonably large size sample, you you've got a pretty clear idea of what people want. But I'll ask her or Tom to talk about the Youth Voice panel, ethnic minority engagement, and resource allocation in relation to that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Councillor Chairman. Yes, I agree with you. So for the public consultation, we've got 192 responses, which, as you said, are a lot more than many of other projects. But also I want to add is that we, apart from that online consultation, we've also taken the documents to the various service areas for internal input. So including the contact center, the policy officers group, and many others. So we've reached out to the localities teams as well, just because they got the closest connection with the citizens, just to make sure that whatever they heard from the residents is reflected in this policy. So for the ethnic minority group, I definitely agree. So I have to admit that although we've made lots of efforts in trying to making sure we reach to those harder to reach groups, we still see that the general pattern is that our consultations are taken mostly by the more affluent members, residents. So the challenge is really about reaching out to the younger generation as well as the ethnic minority groups. So taking residents panel as an example, we have got 1,000 residents sign up to the panel, which is broadly very representative across the different areas of Oxford. But still, despite of 3 years efforts in achieving the representativeness of the panel, we've still seen we really lack the students, the young generation, as well as the non-white group. From an ethnic perspective. So that's definitely a challenge, but we've started making steps to improve this. So the creation of the residents panel is definitely a good way of doing so. So we're monitoring the demographic criteria very closely and making sure that we get as much as we can from those ethnic minority groups. And we conduct the annual residence survey, which is conducted among the resident panel, and the approach allows us to overweight voices from those non-representative groups, making sure that their results is multiplied in the final analysis of the approach. So that's what we do with the minority groups. Sorry, is there another question about
the youth panel? So they asked about the youth panel, Jar Jar, the youth voice panel.
Oh, the youth voice panel. I think the policy itself is more or less about kind of the overarching approach for our engagements. But we know we have a youth panel, and it's run by the locality team separately. We have catch-ups from time to time, but those we take it as kind of a non-standardized engagement run by the project group. And although we have a close connection with each other, we didn't explicitly and spent lots of text on this, but we do have a part about it, I guess. I remember we include it as approach of our engagement. I think it is under the inclusivity and accessibility part that we say it's supported by the youth panel.
I think there was, if I may, Chair, there was also then a question around the interpretation service and kind of how that resource is shared where it needs to be. I think part of the answer around that is the use of the equality impact assessments and using those not as a kind of at the end of the piece of work they're done, but understanding what those issues are at the start of the process. So ensuring that where we are looking at different policies or different initiatives, part of that work is done up front so that we can clearly then identify groups we might want to talk to. There's obviously a wider communications piece, ensuring that people are aware of that facility more generally. I think part of the answer to some of the previous bits is also around our communications. So moving beyond kind of perhaps traditional council comms, we have quite a slick TikTok operation now, which is kind of getting us into different audiences, and our figures around that are really quite strong. And then it's already been mentioned around the localities teams, but they again provide another avenue to get into different communities across the city, and are well linked into those communities directly, but also through other VCSE organisations, which provide another avenue to get to those voices that might sometimes not be heard.
Thank you very much. So we'll go for another round of questions. We'll try and take questions in threes. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. I notice, and it's welcome, the emphasis on consulting the views of younger members of our society, and among other things, doing that through schools. Has any thought been given to maybe using the school the schools as a way to reach some of the adults as well? I mean, the schools I represent a very diverse community. The schools are where people from all different backgrounds come twice a day. They're also in a broader sense where the community meets linguistically, because some of the parents rely on their children to translate for them. So I wondered if maybe some of that bias in our consultation responses towards more affluent members of the community who have more time could be met by not just schools, but by looking for places where a wide variety of different people meet in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. Councillor Muddyman.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's great policy. I really like what I read in there, particularly things about co-production. I've got years and years of experience in community engagement, so this is something I'm really, really passionate about. So I think the policy looks great. I have concerns about how you are going to, and how it has been implemented to date. And just to give you an example, the local plan that was out for consultation earlier this year, I had many emails and conversations with local residents who found the method of consultation about something as important as the local plan inaccessible, impenetrable. And so I encouraged them to go along to, because I saw that there were some events, sort of little road shows, and I encouraged them to go along, and I went to meet some of the residents who wanted to engage with the local plan. And I went to the one at the town hall and met a couple of my residents there. And I have to say, I was expecting, I don't know, a table, boards, some images, maybe a map, something with which to engage residents and make this really, really difficult document more accessible. But instead, I found two very nice members of the planning team who were very pleasant. And they simply had great big, thick wads of paper, a copy of the local plan with them. And they had no materials, they had no method of engagement other than to say, ask me whatever you like, but my point is, when something is as difficult as the local plan to understand and comprehend and try and get a handle around, because it is so complicated, then I think residents need some tools and more work needs to be done on how you're doing that engagement with them. So whilst the policy on paper is great, I am concerned about how you are implementing it. And I would suggest and wonder whether there is a case for, on something as important as the local plan or any other very serious consultations, where it really matters, to have a much more specific, laid out process within the plan, within this policy, so that you take really important pieces of consultation, and I'd say local plan is one of the biggest, and actually have a section within this policy that says, for the local plan, we will ... because I don't feel it's happening at the moment, even though the policy is great. That was one. And the second question, much easier and quicker, could there be something in there about not doing important consultation during the summer holiday and Christmas? Because I do feel that that happens quite often and I would like to see it not happen. So could you put that on the policy, please, too? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Muddyman. I'll take one more question in this round and then we'll go for a round of answers. Councillor Ortina, was that a hand? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering, how do we change the perception that you get from a lot of residents that what's the point? Nobody ever listens. You said there's some examples where we have changed, given feedback from residents. Possibly we should be doing more to highlight that. I mean, what Councillor Attav said about 197, I think I recently posted a county council consultation about parking and we had about 197 people saying, what's the point of responding to it? They've already made up their mind. So how do we change that? And are there examples of other councils where they are getting more numbers responding to consultations? What exactly are they doing differently from us? And then going on to the points you made about different ethnic minorities, are you, I suppose if English isn't your first language, you're not even aware there's a consultation going on. So are you actively going to, I don't know, churches, mosques, temples, places that those different community groups might be meeting and engaging with them at in those spaces to try and get them to to hear their views, so we can hear their views? Because I think otherwise it was all right having a translation service, but if you don't know if there's a consultation, you're not going to take part in it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ortina. Over to Councillor Chapman and the officer team.
Yeah, thank you very much. For some very good points there. Thank you very much. On the schools, I think that's a very good idea, Councillor Rowley, to use the schools as a way in. I mean, obviously, you've got to tailor the issue to be appropriate. But schools have large PTAs and large associations of parents, and putting stuff in their newsletters and things may be a way of getting greater awareness of the fact there's a consultation taking place in their area, and therefore encouraging them to take part. We also obviously have our own ward newsletters where we can do the same thing as councillors. So anything which we can actually promote it, I absolutely support. Councillor Mudderman's example, I'm personally not responsible for the consultation process around the local plan, but I do hear you, and I do worry about what you said there, because the local plan is a very important document. It's one of the most important policy areas, frankly, that we do in the City Council. And we need to make it as accessible and open as possible so that people understand what is a very, very complicated set of issues. So I think I'll pass that over to Tom, maybe to take back to see, in future what we can do better about this sort of complicated issue or any other ones which require distillation of information to help people understand the issues in the first place. And we need to work harder, clearly, at having the right materials in a meeting like that with the public, and not just sort of turning up and saying, hello, you can ask what you like, but there's nothing to read except this massive document which you can't possibly take in. It doesn't feel very good to me. Not the best example of local consultation that I can think of. School holidays and Christmas, yeah, I wouldn't write it quite like that. I would write it more about periods of the year when, for whatever reason, citizens are not so easily available or accessible, because obviously we've got to think about other religious holidays and so on, as well as just Christmas. And then about responding to the consultation, I mean, as I said in the opening, really, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Consultation is great, but if you consult and then you don't do anything about it or change it because you've had an overwhelming response, and the risk of being slightly controversial here, I can think of some recent examples the county council has been involved in, which would fall categorically within that area. Then people do feel disillusioned about it, and therefore we can't afford to let that happen. If people are making reasonable observations about what we do, then they have a right to be listened to, and we should be refining our approach, not be defensive about it, because only by doing that will we improve what we do, which is in the end the aim of the whole thing. So I absolutely get that, and we must make sure we do that. I wonder whether Tom or Jar Jar would like to add anything more about the more technical specifics.
I will say a few things if I may. I think uh, a consultation on how we consult is always going to be, is probably not going to have as many responses to it as if we were to consult on something like parking or other transport issues or closing a library. Different things that will attract naturally different levels of interest. I think that's understandable. I don't think around 200 is too bad for sort of document like this. We can always improve, but I don't think that's awful. I think examples of where can we show that things have changed? I think we can, and the certainly where when the social housing regulator comes and visits us in due course, they're going to want to see how we consult with tenants and the changes we make to policies as a result of that. So I think we can definitely show examples of where that's happened. That is caveated by consultation is consultation, and the views of people who've taken the time to respond need to be taken into account. And if we're not then changing things, we need to say why in very clear terms. The holiday point I think is noted. There are probably no absolutes around that, but we go out to consult because we want to hear from people. So doing it when there's no one around is massively counterproductive. And the point about going to places where people are, absolutely. I mean, that's what hopefully this policy is about. Going to listen to people on their terms. That will feel different for different topics. I suppose what this policy is trying to say is it needs to be appropriate for the magnitude of what the issue is we're looking to listen and talk to people about. So the example of the local plan, I will feed that back. That is disappointing, and there is an onus on us as the council to present things in a way that people can understand. Otherwise, frankly, there's no point in doing the work. And if people have taken the time to turn up, then things should be presented in a way that they can easily engage with. And yeah, I think I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll go for another round of questions. Councillor Altaf Khan, any others? Councillor Miles, and then I have a question, so I'll add myself in third. Councillor Altaf Khan.
Okay, I don't think there is a satisfactory answer around engaging minority communities. And every time, and I think it's been 20 years since I've been here, keep hearing hard to reach community, very difficult work, don't know. I don't think this is rocket science. It's just very easy to go into communities and trying to get hold of it. I don't see any engagement with the community centers, community other groups, and there are a lot of ways, which I'm not an officer, I don't work here, but obviously people who work, they should find the ways to get into different community groups, community centers, schools, we talked, so many of things. And if I, as a ward councillor, can engage thousands of people, why, as a council, as an authority and administration, can't? We put every month a leaflet to the overvote. We never been asked to put anything into that as where the council wants to get word out and say, oh, okay, you put every month, can you add some sort of article, piece, link, something? They never, because it is clear that it is a political administration thinks there are different party councillors. Although we hold the meeting, public meeting, and Labour councillors, there are most Labour councillors live in my ward. They are councillors somewhere else, so sometimes they attend. But we never given by this administration anything. There are notices board in Headington and other places in shopping districts. I was just looking at involvement in council meetings. One of the budget meeting, I made my speech and said, there's one or two people watching the budget of Oxford City setting up, and one of the, obviously the cabinet members stood up and said, oh, there are 4 or 5 people watching on YouTube. So that is the over sort of stance. So there are 5, 6 people watching on the tube, 1 or 2 people sitting in gallery. In ward meeting where we put nearly 3,000 leaflet, And every meeting we get 25 to 30 people. And sometime when we invite somebody, say from police, universities, some sort of departments, there are 40, 50 people attend. So this depends how you reach it. How do you, with the council meetings, you got a calendar. You simply can display that calendar into all community center, all the notices board. All you need is a 50 or 100 pages to print, which is already there, full council meeting, scrutiny, planning, and just display for whole year in those notice boards so people can see, oh, this meeting happened. Everybody doesn't go online and check and see when is which meeting is happening. So rather than us sitting down back and say, oh, it's all online, people can come, people can check. Why don't we go into communities and tell them, say, and people obviously can see clearly what's happening, where is happening, how to get involved in different things. So I do see there is quite a lack in that. And with the ethnic minority groups, and it is not difficult. Councillor Chapman knows the city, everybody knows the city. If you're elected to city and if you don't know it, I'm not sure what's the point to be a councillor if you don't know your city and your communities and east-west of your city, and you don't know where are the community groups and how to get into it. It is just a simple, but I do not, to be honest, see this still happening and comparing thing again. And I see this political, the color behind it. Oh, the county council did this, is only 100 something or 200 is in county. So we are competing with county because they are different color administration and we're different color. Why don't we just take as a responsibility as a running this council as a city? We need to get into the public. We need to get to, don't compare. There are some other councils, if I give you the comparison, how do they work? And I have given this suggestion in the past about the community engagement. Why don't you look at some of the very diverse councils in neighborhood in Southeast Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire? You have a number of different councils. Look at their methods. How do they do it? But again, it is not difficult if we really wanted to get into something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Altaf Khan. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, I've got, well, I had 2 points, but I've got a couple of extra ones that have emerged on the way, so sorry about that. Picking up on Councillor Ortino's point around this feeling that opinions won't matter. And so that was a very high response of people stating that. But what was interesting, if you look at also the topics that they're interested in engaging in, quite a few of those aren't our responsibility as the City Council. So I do wonder whether there's a piece of engagement that needs to be undertaken that to clarify maybe not just the purpose of what these sorts of consultations are, but a little bit more background information about how the council works, particularly since we're such a diverse city and many people who've come here and call it their home maybe didn't grow up here. Certainly if you're an age of, in my generation, we certainly weren't taught how democracy even works at school. So actually for many people, we won't, you don't necessarily know how the council operates. And so maybe that's something, because that feeling of hopelessness that your feelings don't count is possibly sometimes due to misunderstanding. It's not necessarily ignorance. It's just that people just haven't had been made aware of how certain functions of the council work and what we're responsible for and not. Second point is around language. There's a reference to using simple language, which is great, but I feel that the focus is more on the format of the language rather than using plain English. And I think, why use 10 words to express something that can be said in 5? So there's something about sort of the length of the communications, as well as ensuring plain English is used. Call a spade a spade. If I'm telling my children about what I'm doing at the council, I'm talking about rubbish on the street. I'm not talking about ODSs I don't know, there's some fancy word for recycling services. We need to be using simple language. On a third point that I wanted to say is just on some of the ethnic minority discussion, from my personal experience in interacting with residents, typically older women, quite often a particular category there, and actually literacy is a challenge even in their own language. So they might have come from communities where that it's orally based, and so may not be able to read and write even in their first language. And so that's something just to bear in mind, because we have this assumption that everyone can read and write regardless of language, in different languages, but actually that assumption isn't necessarily the case. I know from personal experience, my own grandmother couldn't read or write English, and so had to rely on a translator. Then in terms of notice boards, final point here, they're really not very accessible and they're not necessarily in the right place. So could we look at consulting with communities to identify where do we need new notice boards? And I think I have dealt with residents on trying to identify new locations, or they have one, but there are planning costs associated with putting one in, as well as the cost of the notice board itself. And then secondly, the issue with some of the council notice boards, you need to find the person with the key. And even as councillors, that can be really challenging. So it stops people putting notice boards up and using them for their intended purpose. So if I were running the notice boards, I would rip out that plastic cover and just make sure, it can be rained on, but just put stuff up so anyone can use them, and also find out where in the city people want notice boards. So there we go. That's my tuppence worth. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. I appreciate there's been quite a range of different questions, but I'm going to add my question in before I pass back to you, Councillor Chapman. So apologies. I mean, the first thing is just to say it's already been raised, but I agree with the point that between the, let's say, city and county, there's a lack of clarity for many residents about who does what and how it works. And I appreciate it's on the website, but I do wonder if it is worth us thinking in our engagement about how we can ensure we're clarifying for residents what the actual responsibilities of the city council are. I mainly say that because, and this obviously partly reflects the ward I represent, but I would say the majority of the correspondence I receive relates to county council functions. And that's obviously an interesting dynamic that speaks to a lack of public understanding of what the two authorities done. Obviously, whatever way it goes, that'll be helped by unitarisation, but it feels like that's something we should be thinking about in our citizen engagement strategy. The other thing was, I note that there is the youth and minority ethnic engagement specifics. I was wondering here in what ways we were specifically looking at ensuring that disabled residents in the city are properly engaged in consultation. I think there's possibly a gap there, and it'd be interesting to hear from yourself, Councillor Chapman, and the officer team, what you think we might be able to do to start to fill that gap, because I think that's, well, disabled people in general are one of the groups least likely to be consulted and least likely to feel that they're able and supported to engage with council decision making. I think the last thing I'd just say is I would be very interested to hear the response around the point that Councillor Miles just raised around notice boards, because from my experience as a councillor as well, tracking down even who is responsible for a given notice board can be quite the challenge. Thank you very much. Councillor Chapman, I'll pass it to you. Sorry, you're on mute.
Apologies, I was muted. Anyway, I'm not muted anymore. So thank you for the range of questions and comments. Where do I start with all of this? I mean, I suppose the first point I'd make about our consultations is that they are inherently about what the city council does. We're not consulting on behalf of the county council, nor are they on behalf of us. So I can't really imagine many times when we would go and consult on something which wasn't our responsibility. So the risk about explaining all that at the front is it slightly confuse people, because they say, well, why are you telling me this? Because of course you're only consulting on what you're responsible for. We wouldn't expect you to be consulting on other stuff. So I think we need to watch that quite carefully. And I do think it will be helped by the unitarisation in the end. I mean, once we have a single council, that issue will go away, because there'll only be one council responsible for what's happening. The issue about ethnic minority engagement, I mean, I do accept we need to do more, and I do accept it needs to be smarter. But I'd go back to Jar Jar's reply earlier on, which is, we do have a citizens panel, residents panel, which is, I think, getting on for, is it about 2,000 people from my memory? It's a significant number. And it is a balanced sample of the city. And if anything, it's actually weighted more towards groups that we find hard to reach by other means. So I think, Councillor Khan, you need to take that into account because that's kind of our bedrock way, really, of connecting with people. The other point you made is about locality officers and communities. I mean, locality officers are increasingly in community centres. They spend time in them every week, so that they see people and they talk to them, and they can use that as an avenue for feedback. I think we may need to formalise it a bit more and ask them to do specific things in this area rather than leave it to their own initiative. And I think I'll take that as something that Tom and I need to talk about in terms of what they actually do and when they do it. All the points about plain English and so on are well understood, and simplicity of communication. It's always harder to write something in 5 words rather than 10. And I think that's what you're really saying to me, that things just get too long-winded. Sometimes everybody packs too much detail in. We need to get some more sub-editors, I think, into the council workforce to improve that. And finally, the notice boards issue. I personally don't have a problem with the notice boards, but maybe it's just the way I'm organised in my ward. But we have a list of them. We have funded some new ones in prominent places in the last 5 years, and they are updated regularly, and people know who has the key. Now, if there's obviously a legacy issue, that will need to be taken out with democratic services, because in the end, we may have to replace some of the locks if you've lost the keys, frankly, or can't get access to the keys. But I find them pretty good. And I also want to endorse what Councillor Khan said about public meetings, that when you invite interesting speakers, I also get the same sort of numbers in Northway to my public meetings, which take place every 3 months. We advertise them widely through the notice boards and also through the ward newsletter, which goes to every household. And people come with a real variety and range of issues, and we have a robust conversation, and we take those issues away and we act upon them, and there's a lot of casework generated by them as well, which I think is really, really good. So that just as a comment about the way public meetings work, which endorses basically what Councillor Khan was saying, that they are a very effective way of engaging with people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. I just wanted to revisit one point, which was around the inclusion of disabled citizens and whether there were any specific measures we were taking regarding that one. I appreciate there were lots and lots of questions there.
I know that's a fair question, Chair, and I don't know off the top of my head the specifics, and maybe I don't know whether Jar Jar has anything to add on that. She's nodding, so.
Sure. Yeah, so we do have one thing so for at the end, as the later part of every public consultation we run on our portal, we have a demographic section at the end asking people about, for example, which gender, age, are they disabled, what their what's their ethnicity are. So we often we visit that part from time to time to make sure that if there's anything coming out, for example, we don't have any responses from the disabled group, that we can quickly spot that out.
Thank you very much. So,
just a point on the notice boards. I think, as Councillor Chapman said, each councillor need to check their notice boards in their ward. In Headington, I have no problem getting access into it, and I have also funded from my ward budget a new notice board, and we can get notices up very quickly. And because we got the shopping district, every ward don't have that, so a lot of people walk past in the shopping district. So I do think that's something be taken in each locality, how that works.
thank you very much, Councillor Altofcon. When we come to discussions around recommendations, I think that's something I wanted to revisit there, but I want to see if there are any more questions first. Are there any other questions members wish to raise? Any questions? No? Councillor Ottino.
I suppose coming back to notice boards, then I wonder whether we should move to a situation where they're not being funded out of ward member budgets, because that's pretty much your budget for a year to get one in, and there are clearly parts of the city where there are quite a lot of more notice boards than other parts of the city where there are relatively few, where perhaps councillors have had to spend their money on other things. I don't think there's any in my ward. There are some parish council notice boards, but they won't give me access to them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rotina. I'll come to Councillor Mundy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just in reference to the policy on incentives, I just wanted to know roughly how often we're using incentives as part of consultations and how it reflects upon the response rate that we get. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions before we go back for answers? Yeah, Councillor Miles with a clarification.
Yeah, and Councillor Chapman and I think Councillor Atina have referred to the fact that you've successfully managed to get new notice boards in place. Could you just clarify how the planning permission, whether you sought that as part of the process, because that seems to be the big hurdle and the cost of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll come to Councillor Chapman for a round of answers. I think in terms of Councillor Rotina, if we could pick that one up outside, because we'll stick to questions to Cabinet, if that's okay.
Well, I haven't had any problems with notice boards. I mean, I've only, I think, invested in 2 in the last 7 or 8 years. I didn't have any planning permission issues with them. When they were on council land, you know, they were not in a difficult place like that. I then went to ODS, asked them for a quote. The quote was reasonable. They built it. It was up in no time, basically, and it's still there, and it's very robust. They're strong and robust and waterproof and all these things, and they're doing fine. And we use them to promote the public meetings that Councillor Altaf Khan mentioned earlier on, and everything else. We also have, I want to flourish it because it's something I'm very proud of, is the Northway newsletter, which is published by a charity in the city, in the ward, which also publicises our public meetings. So we have 2 written forms of literature going into people's homes right across the ward, not all parts of the ward in the case of the Northway newsletter, but across Northway every 3 months. And the ward newsletter goes to every household, obviously, in the ward every 2 to 3 months as well. I think I'll leave the other, I mean, on the issue of community notice boards generally, I do understand it can feel inequitable and unfair. And I think that's a matter for the budget round, to be honest with you. I think if people want to put in a budget proposal about community notice boards, it will have to fight its corner with everything else. But I do see their value is definitely strong. So I'm a supporter of them. I'll leave the other questions to Jar Jar and Tom.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to answer the question about the incentives. So as far as I know, in the past 3 years, we've only used incentives to help recruit for our residence panel. And for all the other public consultations, we barely use incentives because we believe that for a public consultation, we need to let people make their own decision in terms of if they want to take in part or not. For the residence panel, we have a quarterly prize draw, which is basically just to encourage people to sign up and to recommend our residence panel to their friends.
Thank you very much. I'm minded to move us towards recommendations, but I did just want to ask one quick question, which is basically whether, in light of the discussion we've had around notice boards, officers might be willing to support a communication to members just outlining process. Not in that sense, wouldn't come as a recommendation, but is there any scope for us just to ask for a member's email outlining process to try and get some, obviously this does link to the paper and it might help to create some clarity.
I'm happy to take that away, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think that will very much help, given that we seem to have differing perceptions of how the process works. So if we can get clarity, I think that will resolve that. So we'll move to recommendations. Was there any recommendations that members were minded to propose?
Yeah, I think Councillor Chapman took this on board, so we want to put as a recommendation that the locality officers working with the community associations at the community centers and some other community organizations where there is no community center. So if you're trying to get something out and trying to get engaged, I think they are the very obvious and good, democratically elected community groups. So we should be engaging with them. It's not a point that the locality officers visit them or they are there in one or two community center. I know there are locality officers are based there, but they're doing other work. So if it's some sort of task given to them extra, that you have to get out that many people or reach to many people so they can.
Thank you very much, Councillor Altaf Khan. Just to paraphrase in a recommendation form, I wonder if basically the point there was we should specifically task within the strategy locality officers to have a role in the dissemination of consultations. Does that sound a fair summary? Just trying to get it into a form we can recommend to Cabinet. Anyone would like to second? Yeah, Councillor Miles. Are we all happy to put that as a recommendation? I see no dissent, so we will approve that. Celeste, is that clear enough? Thank you very much, Councillor Altaf Khan. Are there any other recommendations? Councillor Muddyman?
Thank you, Chair. That the policy include a reference to times that should be avoided where possible, busy times, e.g. particular holidays, etc., so that consultation doesn't take place during those times wherever possible.
Thank you, Councillor Muddyman. I would be happy to second that. Is there anyone who, is everyone happy with proposing that as a second recommendation? Thank you very much. Any more for any more? Councillor Rowley? They didn't catch that. Do you want to repeat that?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. So without me waffling on again, can we recommend that any consultation document is checked for readability and understandability either by an officer or perhaps even better by a residence panel member or an elected member before it gets sent out?
Thank you very much. So just to repeat to make sure colleagues online have heard, the recommendation or proposed recommendation was that we basically include an inclusivity check before a consultation document goes out. And that could be tasked either to an officer or a residence panel member. I think it sounds like a good idea. Is everyone happy to put that forward as a recommendation? Brilliant. We will put that forward. The one last thing that I also wanted, apologies for the number here, but the other thing I wanted to pick up is I think it would be really, really helpful to have some explicit thought in the consultation strategy or in the strategy, regarding how we try and include disabled people within our consultations. I can see there's already good work going on around young people. There's good work going on around ethnic minority populations, and I completely take your point, Jaja, that we're already collecting the demographic information regarding how many people did in fact participate. But I think it would be still good in terms of inclusivity to have a sort of frontline idea of how do we try and include disabled people within our consultations. I'm willing to keep that as quite an open-ended recommendation, just a section addressing how we include disabled people within the strategy, perhaps, would be the way I might phrase it. Would everyone be happy with that as a recommendation? Brilliant. Is there anything else people wish to propose, or are we happy? Oh, we've got more hands. Councillor Mundy, come on in.
Yeah, so in light of Zhao response in regards to incentives that are used, I did want to propose possibly, given that currently incentives, as you've said, have only been used for the sign up to the Citizens Assembly. and there is evidence that it can encourage participation in consultations. And obviously we've got a very well worded section in the policy in regards to how it could be used effectively and reasonably. I wonder whether it would be worth perhaps experimentally opening that out to potentially using that for consultation surveys to see if we can get improved response rates to our consultations, or at least having that option costed. Because we do usually get very low response rates, and as Councillor Chapman pointed out, the response rate that we've had to this particular survey is fairly typical in its numbers. I rarely see a survey that gets more than 500 responses. So yeah, just to get other councillors' views really on whether that's something that we'd be prepared to recommend. Thank you.
Would anyone like to express a view on this one? Yeah, Councillor Ottino.
I suppose are you suggesting all consultations with your applicant now? Because obviously we need to sort of need to prioritise the things that we think actually some of them are quite boring, aren't they? So why would anybody respond, I suppose, or technical? So we need to prioritise the ones where we really do want to hear people saying, yeah, so word it in such a way that sometimes, and then I suppose up to the officers to decide when. So we don't want to I don't know, we may have millions of consultations and bankrupt ourselves.
So 100%. I wasn't suggesting all consultations would involve the incentive scheme. What I wanted to know is actually more to the point is whether using the incentive scheme more often or for consultations rather than just with the Citizens Assembly would actually have a positive outcome in terms of our response rates. So I'm talking about, not all at all, just one or two of them. As you say, prioritising the ones we most want to get feedback is an option, but also just knowing whether that's a part of the policy that could be successfully applied is something that would be worth knowing and going forward.
Sort of related to that, Councillor Mundy, in order to identify the ones that we think are most important and the ones that we really want people to respond to against those that are, as Councillor Ottino says, are really boring and we're not so bothered. I'm just wondering whether it'd be good to have some kind of, I don't know, 5-star rating where we actually say, these are the sorts of things, if they're regular things that happen every year, like, I don't know, looking at the budget or whatever they are, if they're regular repeating things that we actually, when we're looking at our consultations, we actually have a sort of 1 to 5, where if it's number 1, so something like the local plan, to refer to my earlier example, would be in category 1, and we say if it's a category 1 consultation, we will, and then it lists the things from the policy document that we will do, the very sort of, that we will look at co-production, that we will look at offering incentives, that we will look at things to really, really try to get engagement up high, right down to number 5, where it might be very minimum. We'll put it on the website. So I'm just wondering whether there might be some benefit in rating things, because in order to do what Councillor Mundy is suggesting, and also what Councillor Ottino is suggesting, we need to rank things as to whether they are sort of high priority for consultation or low priority for consultation, and then say high priority, we will do this, this, and this. Low priority, we'll do this, this, and this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Muddyman. I'm going to propose that we might mesh those two together, in essence. I wonder if what we're really asking is for some exploratory work to be done regarding how, firstly, we might decide which and whether to use incentives on a given issue. So firstly, a ranking system, and secondly, to do some work into what the impact of that might be. So I think the ask, I could be wrong, but my sense of the ask here is that it's a request for officers just to do some exploratory work about whether incentives would help, and how, if we were to include them more for things other than the Citizens Assembly, we might decide which things. The reason I'm phrasing it that way is obviously that we're not in a budget round, and I presume we are not able to give money over to that, so this would only be exploratory. I can see Councillor Chapman's hand.
Yeah, just a bit of feedback about one of the earlier recommendations. I don't really want to rewrite the policy around inclusion for disabled people, because The principles are in the policy, and the policy is clear that it's about inclusivity for everybody, all groups, all different parts of society. What I can, if you put something down around exploring how better to target those groups and make sure they are included in consultations, rather than merely recording whether disabled people have taken part in a consultation, that's something that I would be sympathetic to. Do you see what I mean? Rather than going right back to the policy. It doesn't need to rewrite the policy. It needs to apply the policy in a more effective way in relation to those groups.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chapman. And yeah, just to clarify, that is effectively what I had in mind, although perhaps the wording wasn't clear on that. Can we just revisit the exact wording we had, Celeste? Could you?
For now, Chair, if we've got explicit thought in the policy regarding how we try disabled people in our consultations.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe if we just frame that as ensure that the policy includes some detail, going what you said, Councillor Chapman.
It's the application of the policy, Chair.
Yes.
That's the, I think, the phrase you're looking for.
Yeah. Ensure that the policy is applied in such a way as to maximise the inclusion of disabled people, or something to that effect.
Fine.
Thank you very much. So just coming back to this issue around ranking, the wording I would propose is ask officers to undertake work into a ranking system for the importance of consultations, and to explore the possibility of whether incentives would increase engagement. It's really open-ended. It's a clear question for Cabinet, and that gives us something to recommend that I think otherwise we're going to get caught in the weeds of quite complicated ask. Is everyone happy with that as a consolidation of what's been proposed? Was that okay for you as well, Celeste?
Sorry, would you mind just repeating the wording of that final recommendation, please?
So the final one, we want to explore a system for ranking the importance of consultations and investigate whether increased use of incentives might encourage greater participation with important consultations. No worries. Thank you. So we have 5 recommendations there. I think we've asked for a good number of things. Is there anything else anyone wishes to raise, or are we happy on this item? In that case, thank you to Councillor Chapman, to Jaja, and to Tom for coming along. Thank you so much for answering our questions, and I know we've put a lot to you and really, really appreciated your responses. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are at 7:03. We have one item, substantive item remaining, which is the budget review scope. I would normally ask, do people feel like they want a break? But I think we can probably do this in 20 minutes. So is everyone happy to proceed? If we find it's taking longer, we may revisit that. But we'll proceed to the budget review scope. So as you will remember, we had agreed back in the June scrutiny to create budget review group. We're now going to talk about the scope of that group. I'm going to pass over to Celeste to introduce this report, and then we'll come back for discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Each year, Oxford City Council is required by legislation to follow a statutory process to set the balanced budget within the prescribed timeline. Scrutiny or examination is a key part of this process and will be undertaken by the Budget Review Group. The paper presents the committee the scope and terms of reference within which the Budget Review Group will operate, setting out a clear plan for the group's activities and work for scrutinizing or examining the proposals of the budget next year. The Budget Review Group will meet 5 times over the period of December and January, and they will be thematically structured to enable the review of each directorate budgets, council-owned companies, and certain financial assets. Some areas of focus proposed include financial mitigation strategies, impacts of inflation and cost of living crisis, sustainability of the council companies. As well, there'll be attention to optimism, bias, realism, risks of slippage in revenues, and implications of artificial intelligence and the local government reorganization. There's a full list of themes in the appendix attached. At the end of the review, the group will make its recommendations and submit it to the committee for approval, before then advancing it to Cabinet and thus the full council in February. And the committee tonight is asked to agree the scope proposed or any amendments to it. The terms of reference, both of which are, as I mentioned, is appended to the report. And finally, I believe it's also asking for a delegation of authority to the Scrutiny Governance Advisor to enable minor amendments in consultation with the Scrutiny Chair and the Budget Review Group Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celeste. So I'm going to assume people have had a chance to look at the report in advance. Were there any comments or potential amendments people wish to raise in regard to the report? I had one very minor point I wish to raise, which is within the scope. I should do with finding the page here, but I will do that in a minute. Within the scope, it currently makes reference to maximising savings from artificial intelligence and basically the use of digital technologies. I do wonder if it is worth explicitly saying there savings or costs associated with the use of artificial intelligence and digital technologies, acknowledging the fact that obviously anything that we choose to do as a council to incorporate the use of artificial intelligence, for example, is likely to be cost-bearing, even if it is cost-saving. And also, given the nature of such technologies as highly experimental, I would not want to predict with any significant confidence what the impact of their use may in fact be. It's a very minor amendment, probably just adding 2 words and costs. Is everyone happy with that? Anybody, any comments regarding that? Are we all happy to approve that as a very minor amendment to the report? Thank you very much. I think we do have to take a formal vote on this, don't we?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, could we take a formal vote on that? Is there a second? I see Councillor Latif, and all in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Just for context, unlike with the recommendations, because this is Scrutiny's own report, we have to take it as formal votes. Councillor Miles.
Thank you. I think at previous meetings, we've raised the issue of environmental health receiving decreasing amount of budget, despite the City Council being kind of the only authority that looks after this responsibility. So, you know, it can't be outsourced to another agency because we are the agency responsible for that. So given the concerns that have been raised by officers at previous meetings, I wonder whether we could highlight this as a particular area to explore during the budget review.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. Just in terms of the mechanism there, I presume if we could insert a line into the scope specifically asking Budget Review Group to assess the impact on the environmental health function of budgetary changes proposed. That sound like an efficient mechanism? Partly checking with you there, Celeste.
No, that is the way to go, Councillor. Yeah, Chair, sorry. But yeah, just to note the point that you've made on the artificial intelligence, adding that it is also cost bearing as it is cost saving. Yep, that's duly noted, as well as Councillor Miles's point on the assessment of the impact of environmental team, I believe. But no, health, yes, pardon me, environmental health. But yeah, both of those points are noted and will be added to the scope.
Thank you. Just to make sure we did it all officially, I think we should also vote on that, shouldn't we, Celeste? Councillor Rotino?
Yeah, I suppose, why would we only put that in as opposed to lots of other things as well? Aren't these lines of inquiry they're sort of over everything, aren't they? Not actually focusing on one sort of department and one area of spend. Plus, this proposal sort of is about one area of spend, and I don't mind us looking at, but there's all sorts of things we need to be looking at, which probably will be under huge pressure when we get the budget.
I guess just I'll come to you in just a second, Councillor Miles. Councillor Rotino, you're absolutely right that it's a general scope, because obviously the budget review group can look at all elements of the budget, but I suppose the effect of us adding it in would be to give them a particular remit to particularly focus on the impact on that function of any other decision, which, well, my understanding of Councillor Miles' rationale was because no other organisation, unlike some of the other things we do, has any responsibility in that area. But I'll come over to Councillor Miles.
Thank you. I think the point here is it's a statutory responsibility of the council, if my understanding is correct in using the term, the correct terminology. As I think we've seen in previous meetings, the amount of money that is being spent on that has actually decreased over time, but the pressures on that function and that statutory duty or fulfillment of that has increased over time, which creates that mismatch. And that may be because of the overall reduction in resources that we as a city council receiving from central government. So naturally that might have that impact. But I think what is important is that some other areas of our spending are not necessarily statutory, they're more nice to have. So it's kind of this, we are providing this core function versus some of the nice to have functions where we're allocating maybe increased budget spend. So I think that is a core point. Thank you.
Councillor Attino?
Sorry, well, Glenn, could we sort of say statutory responsibilities, which there are more than just that, rather than just focusing on one? I mean, I dread the time that's all we do is our statutory responsibilities and we don't do anything more, anything else that around equalities and things like that. We're just doing licensing and planning and environmental health, then that's can be a very dull council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Attino. So I guess the proposal then, I'll come back to you in a second as the proposer, Councillor Miles, was that we broaden that to say effectively setting a specific scope to look at the implications for our statutory responsibilities of other spending decisions. So, for example, what is the impact of discretionary spend on the statutory responsibilities of the council? Would that be amenable to your proposal?
Yeah, I think yes, but I think I would like us to very specifically also put maybe in brackets, e.g. environmental health. The difference between that, say, and licensing is, so environmental health is like about rat control, for instance, and some of these business regulatory services. The difference there between, say, taxi licensing is this generation of income, that is therefore with a taxi license, you pay, people pay a fee for their license, and then the administration of the license is paid for by that fee. So we can't allocate other money to that area. Whereas something like, which is a statutory responsibility, but is not income necessarily based around, say, like rat pest control, is it is impacted by discretionary spending on other areas. So there, I guess the point is that there are different types of statutory responsibilities that we have, which will have different budgetary implications because they have a revenue generating or non-revenue generating sort of role that is bound by different areas of legislation. So central government legislation actually binds our spending around licensing, but it doesn't around the environmental health, as I understood it. I could be wrong, but that's my...
No, I mean, I think what you're sort of expressing there is that we have the responsibility, but there is no particular framework about how much we have to spend on that responsibility, which means that gaps can emerge in provision. So, I mean, Councillor Attino, I'll give you a chance to respond, and then I think what we'll do is we'll take a vote on where we stand on this, if that's okay.
I mean, yeah, isn't providing temporary accommodation a statutory responsibility? And that is the thing that is going to potentially bankrupt the council. My understanding, if we're not careful, and not just our council but other councils. So if it was statutory responsibilities, and I'm happy with EG, but statutory responsibilities, yeah.
I would like to try and find consensus. Is EG an acceptable?
I mean, the point is, as long as this area does not get ignored, because I think what ends up happening is we focus just on the housing aspect, which is, obviously important. But if people have rats in their houses, regardless, it's still also important. And we make trade-offs all the time as a council. And this is one that we've been trading off for probably a bit too long at the expense of, environmental health.
Thank you very much. So I think we have a consensus proposal there that we will say that the scope includes looking at the impact of discretionary spend decisions on statutory responsibilities, e.g. environmental health. Is that okay? Are you happy to propose that, Councillor Miles? Councillor Attino, do you want a second as you... And then can we have a vote on that, please? Can I see all in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. Are there any other amendments to scope people wish to propose? I am seeing none, so I will instead move to agree the scope as amended. Can I please see, or I propose, in fact, that we approve the scope. Is there a second? Councillor Latif, thank you very much. And can I see all in favour? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. We also need to agree the terms of reference. Is everyone happy with the terms of reference? Anything to say before we do that? Brilliant. I propose we approve the terms of reference. Can I see a second? Councillor Miles, all in favour? Thank you very much. And lastly, we need to agree to delegate power to the Scrutiny and Governance Advisor to make minor amendments. Just to advise everyone, this is basically to allow things like changes of date for the Budget Review Group, not actual amendments to the substance. So this is practically quite necessary. I propose we delegate that authority. Can I again see a second? I see Councillor Rowley, all in favour? Thank you very much. Again, that is unanimous. Thank you. So we will now move to the work plan. Celeste, are you happy to give us an update on the work plan, please? That's item 9.
Yes, happy to, Chair. The committee can expect to review 3 substantive items at the next meeting. That will be the annual safeguarding report, adoption of the antisocial behaviour policy, development of affordable homes in Westlands Drive and Holiday Hill. I suppose one of the question I would put to the committee is whether or not they're happy with that, or if they want us to include other items that's on the forward plan to the next meeting. In terms of reports that the committee has requested, I'm pleased to say that we have got particularly climate focused items that are penciled for early next year. That would include biodiversity net gain, shared prosperity fund and green skills, and the impact of how we manage litter and fly tipping across the city. Once again, I'd like to put a question to the committee whether they're content for the Climate and Environment Group to consider this item, or if they would want to consider this within their agenda themselves. In terms of other items that have been requested, we are still liaising with officers in regard to items, particularly nighttime economy and management of water courses through council-owned lands. If there's any updates, I will bring it to the committee in due course. And lastly, I think, Chair, you mentioned this earlier at the start of the meeting, just that the committee may be aware that the special meeting is being convened in November. And as of today, that date is for the 5th of November, not the 3rd. And that's to consider the local government reorganization proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celeste. So in terms of the work plan, I did have one amendment that I wish to propose, which was specifically the litter-based item that was going to go to climate and environment. My sense is that that has broader implications for the city because it relates to fly tipping, and therefore my proposal will be to bring it to the main scrutiny committee rather than the climate and environment group. I'm proposing that as an amendment to the work plan. Are people happy with that? Thank you, Councillor Rotino. I think that seems like there's general assent to that proposal. Thank you, everyone. I didn't have anything else on the work plan. Is there anything anyone else wished to raise? Perfect. So are we happy to approve the work plan? Thank you very much, everyone. We then move to cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. So this is going back to the cabinet meeting on the 13th of August. So I was present at the meeting. We presented 6 recommendations from the committee and the working groups in total. 3 of these were agreed and 3 were partially agreed. So that's very, very good. The first was obviously regarding the Oxpens River Bridge. We had recommended that Cabinet undertake high-level remodelling to assess the potential impact of judicial review appeal progressing to a hearing, i.e. what would the additional costs be if the timescales were to extend. Cabinet agreed to this. Basically, they said that a delay due to JR beyond autumn 2025 will result in the delivery of the project being pushed back from 2026 to 2027 in order to avoid construction of the highest flood risk. The high-level cost of such delay was verbally reported at the meeting. So if you can go and look at the minutes of that as well, the cost is recorded. And forgive me, I cannot remember off the top of my head what that number was, but it is in the minutes of the meeting. We secondly move to talk about the Climate and Environment Working Group's recommendations. So this is firstly regarding the Local Plan 2042 Climate Change and Resilience component. So the first recommendation was that the Local Plan 2042 include clearer support for renewable energy schemes, particularly potential for solar panel installations on terrace houses through community-led energy schemes. This was agreed by Cabinet. So they said that the new local plan will set out clear support for renewable energy generation, as is the case in the first draft of the plan, as they put it. So they said it was crucial that flexibility is retained in relation to what form this generation takes. Then they wanted to leave some space around recommendations that might arise in future for new technologies and similar. But basically, they said they would consider how best to respond to proposals from community-led energy schemes and whether any currently proposed policies suitably cover this. So this was a yes, but it was also a this is already covered in the plan. And obviously, when I finish going through, we can talk about those if there's anything we want to respond with. They also said, we also made a recommendation around greater robustness in the 2042 plan supporting text, acknowledging the urgency of climate action when balancing the need to address the climate emergency through retrofitting heritage buildings. This was agreed in part. So the proposed draft policy in the current 2042 Regulation 18 consultation, they said, responded strongly to the need for mitigating the impacts of climate change and adapting to it. And they wanted to make sure the message continued to come through strongly. So once again, this was sort of a sense of a response that was, yes, we've already done that. So again, I will give space for responding if people wish to. The third was for explicit references to the potential use of energy offsetting funds from developers for retrofit improvements to schools and community buildings. This again was agreed in part. So they again said that the proposed policy is clear the use of offsetting should be a last resort and the preferences for net zero carbon to be achieved on site. Is welcome. But they then said where offset funds are collected, it will be important these funds are spent on projects that identified through a fair and transparent methodology and that the funding is utilised for delivering true offsetting. So they said that they would look for ways to reference in the local plan examples of how they would utilise funds generated from offsetting going forward. So I think this one was in part, but sort of yes at the same time. The final one from Climate and Environment was recommendation 4, which was that there is specific language acknowledging the potential for loss and damage associated with new and existing properties in high-risk flood areas. And local plan policies ensure applicants take account of these potential impacts in future planning and climate resilience design. This was agreed. So they said the 2042 plan is focused on adaptation and mitigation, and the local plan specifies a specific draft policy G9, which is proposed to ensure new development is designed in a way that is resilient to future climate change. So that one was agreed. And the final one is, on the annual air quality status report, also from the Climate and Environment Group. The recommendation here was that air quality plan incorporates specific measures addressing the use of diesel generators associated with street trading, construction and other activities. And this was basically in recognition of the council's regulatory responsibilities. This was agreed in part. There was an acknowledgement of the importance of air quality monitoring, but they said at this stage they were unable to commit to specific measures in detail. That concludes the recommendations. So we are asked as a committee to note them, but obviously I will give space for anyone who wishes to respond. We can report responses back. So is there anyone who wishes to speak? I'm particularly thinking Catherine as chair of Climate and Environment Panel. Have you had any responses?
I mean, my main response is it's all very well them saying, yes, partial, we're already doing that. The recommendations wouldn't have come if they were, if it was very clear that it was already being done, and given that we did scrutinise, both cabinet members and officers on the topic. So just, sometimes I worry about it's not necessarily completely, authentic, the response when it's being said that we're already doing that, because why would we have bothered with a recommendation as a panel if it was already clear and being done? So I think that's politics, but unfortunately we just have to accept it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. Obviously, we are asked to note them. Is there anything else anyone wishes to say, or are we happy to note them? Thank you very much. So the last thing is to report back on recommendations. Now, I'd usually hand over to Celeste at this point, but I know we actually have members of both of the working groups in the room. So if it's okay with you, firstly, Councillor Mundy, I wonder if you could just give us any insights from the Housing and Homelessness Working Group as a member of that group. Obviously, Celeste also has access to the recommendations if I'm putting you on the spot. You don't have to, don't worry.
I'm going to defer to Celeste. Thanks.
No worries at all. Thank you.
Just a very high level of update to the committee. It's so the Housing and Homelessness panel did meet on Tuesday, the 2nd of September, and they considered 4 items, 2 of which were cabinet reports. So the first one was the re-procurement of housing for a service support. I think they were broadly happy with how the support is and how it's going to cabinet. So there were no recommendations made on that particular item. The second one was the temporary accommodation placement policy, and I believe this is where one of their recommendations was made, and that would be that cabinet ensures the temporary accommodation placement policy incorporates a degree of flexibility to take account of extraordinary employment circumstances, including those who work irregular hours or on variable contracts, in order to support fairness and further clarity.
Thank you.
Yeah. The third item they considered, sorry, Chair, was the housing service QN performance for 25-26, and lastly, the annual update on social housing allocations and lettings, for which they did have wide-ranging discussions, including the mismatch between demand and supply, particularly for one-bed homes, which are in high demand but underrepresented in the current stock. They also focused on need for transparency and communication around eligibility, especially for those in Band 5, where there is very low likelihood of being housed. Other areas explored included downsizing incentive schemes and concerns about unseen overcrowding in council homes. So the working group acknowledged recent improvements to the council website, which set out clear and honest messaging about the realities of social housing availability, and they welcomed the prospect of a new program that will potentially would update tenant household details in hopes that this will help monitor their band placement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celeste. So just as a reminder for colleagues, we were not present, or the majority of us were not present at the meeting, so we can't really amend what the working group have proposed, but we are asked to endorse that recommendation. Is everyone happy to endorse the recommendation from the Housing and Homelessness Working Group? Thank you. We'll now move to the Climate and Environment Working Group. Councillor Miles, are you happy to talk through the recommendations from that group?
Sure. So we had an update on the heat network, the 2 areas of the city that this is being explored. And we were asked by officers around that if and when this heat network is delivered, what kind of social value would we like to see being created by the organisation that is responsible for the delivery of that network. And so the first recommendation relates to that. So some of the topics that came up was drawing on the experience of the Botley Road closures and some of the work that Thames Water is often doing to our city with negative impacts on all of us as residents. Then we discussed disruption to local businesses, safety concerns, damage to properties, and some of these broader community impacts, and also that if there were going to be a sort of profit sharing in due course as a result of the heat network, then we would want to see that some of that money addresses the issue of fuel poverty, because although the off-takers of that heat network might not be individual residents, if there is income, we thought that it sounded relevant to be addressing that and addressing insulation and energy efficiency upgrades using such funding. There were concerns raised around the ownership model of the infrastructure that is going to be developed through digging up our roads in the city to create the heat network, and that based on the Thames Water debacle that we're currently faced with in the city, there was a strong recommendation around further scrutiny around the ownership model of that infrastructure that is being created for the heat network. And then there were also concerns around the potential monopoly provider of this heat network, which, while we were reassured that some of these arrangements are being explored and discussed to ensure that this isn't necessarily the case, we wanted to highlight that there isn't this monopoly, and that there is public benefit that is created through the provision of this. I think those are the three main areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. So again, we are asked to Councillor Ottino, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Catherine. When you were talking about this, what did you talk about? What the relationship between the city council and this heat network is? Because it's going to be under the roads, which obviously aren't our responsibility, connected to some source of heat, which is probably coming from the university or some data things. Apart from that, our buildings might be connected to it in the city centre. What is our sort of connection or ability to influence it, or whether is it? Apart from the fact, there's a big building in the city centre, we might join it.
Yeah. There are, and maybe others might be able to clarify and make sure I've got this correct, but there is a partnership model through some of the major off-takers in the city, but also I think we would be contributing to some of this process in other cities. The district council or unitary, whatever the model is actually the one that has received the funding to develop this, and maybe Les might be able to, Councillor Muddiman might be able to clarify, but there is also some potential legislation, I think, that we might have a role more formally on this coming from central government. But yeah, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you. Yes, I don't normally sit on that, but I was subbing there, like I'm subbing now, so feed in. We were mainly concerned about the public ownership of the infrastructure. So that was but we were aware that some of that was actually to do with the financial agreement, which was going to be made, which has not yet been made between the partners and what they call One Energy, the contractor. So we wanted our biggest concern was that we didn't end up in a situation, as Councillor Miles said, where we have a monopoly provider of the infrastructure. So we wanted that to be publicly owned, and for there to be some mechanism for profit sharing, so that we also benefited from any money they make.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, so the funding that has been secured, which isn't all of the funding yet for the development of this heat network, as we understood it, has been secured by a potential partner who will be implementing this. That is the said One Energy. In other places, it has been the city council equivalent that has bidded and secured funding to be developing this network. So, what there was also concerns about was in terms of the kind of procurement, because if you've already got one organisation that comes to us and says, we've already got the money to do this work, but there hasn't been a more formal bidding to ensure that whoever does that work is the most appropriate provider for it. That was something that we raised concern about. We were reassured, I should add, that these are concerns that officers and the other partners themselves have, and that this would be being explored through the partnership sort of a coordination structure that has been created to guide this process. But we wanted to make sure that from Scrutiny, we put forward these recommendations around these two areas of the ownership model of the infrastructure and the monopoly concern. And that's why recommendations 2 and 3 are noted to express our concerns there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. Councillor Ottino?
So how do we make them listen to us? Because I mean, we're all dreading that road being dug up and being a nightmare for 2 years. It's not our road. Yeah, how are they? And they're a private company being given, licensed by somebody. I'm sort of slightly unclear why the city council is sort of involved in that it could potentially be a really positive thing, but how do we have ability to influence it? It's not going to be our land that's dug up. We're not going to be giving permissions for the road to be open and shut. We're not going to be I doubt we're providing any of the heat source. We might just be recipient of it. It seems sort of almost out of our control.
So if I may, initially some of the funding structure that had been predicted for the development of these heat networks was through a grant that the City Council could have bid for, but in the national budget review earlier on this year, that grant to local government for this purpose was actually cut. So I think that it part is connected to some of the historic areas, but also my understanding is that there is a role that national government is giving to local government in managing heat networks going forward. What I would suggest is, if you want more information, you can read the presentation that the officers have provided. We did actually record the meeting, even though it was for note-taking purposes only, but that might be useful. And if you feel that we want scrutiny of this agenda item to come back to the main scrutiny committee and not just climate panel, then obviously that can also be suggested. So back over to Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miles. I'm going to propose, Councillor Tino, sort of sense checking this with you. Would the committee be amenable to endorsing the recommendation, but also putting a request to officers to clarify the basis on which we have a role? So officers will explain that. I don't think anyone here is going to be able to give a definitive answer, but obviously it is preferable that we endorse this here, because then it can go to Cabinet. If we bring it back here, Cabinet are likely to decide on it before they hear our recommendation, which is not very helpful in the scheme of things. So I'm going to ask if we're happy to endorse it, notwithstanding the fact that we might not fully understand the basis of why we have a role. My view, at least, is if we do have a role, we should use it. And I'm not going to worry about why we do until later on. Is that okay with you, though, Councillor Tino?
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. In that case, are we happy to endorse the Climate and Environment Group's recommendations? Yeah. Thank you very much. The last thing just to say on this item is, Councillor Munday, I do apologise for putting you on the spot. This is something new Celeste and I were trying, which is basically having members of the working groups talk about the work that they've been doing rather than going over to officers, so we can get a bit more of a councillor-led discussion on these items that otherwise is very difficult for most of us to weigh in on because we weren't there.
Prepare for next time, Chair.
Thank you.
There is just one more recommendation on the local EV.
Okay. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just the final recommendation on the local EV infrastructure, because we had an EV update, and this came as a suggestion that as a council-owned company, Ox Place should be ensuring that the EV charge points that are put into its new developments are accessible to the wider community and not just those who are living in those places. And then also, given that there are many workplace EV charging points that are being created in the city, because we have this huge imbalance that we have lots of workspace in the city centre and lots of people drive in for that, but there are local residents who only have no parking, that's only on-street parking, and they don't have access to any EV charging there at the moment because of the structure of terraced housing. And so the recommendation is that local residents could, during evenings and weekends, potentially through planning conditions, use these workplace EV chargers that are not used in the evenings when all the commuters have left the city. So that was based on an excellent example that Councillor Mudderman has managed to secure usage of an EV charging points for residents off the Botley Road. So yeah, it's drawing on a good practice example. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Are we all happy to endorse that recommendation as well? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Are we happy with, we've endorsed everything there, haven't we? The ordering got confused for a minute there, but as long as we're all happy that we have in fact approved endorsed them all, I am satisfied. The last thing for us to note is the date of the next meeting. That will be on the 14th of October. And with that, I hope you all have a lovely evening. We are getting out before 8 p.m, which always feels nice. Thank you very much, everyone.